My name is Amber Dawson. I'm 34 years old. And the morning my sister called to tell me our father was dead, he was sitting 3 feet away from me, stealing bacon off my plate. 6:30 in the morning. I put the call on speaker so he could hear his own eulogy get rehearsed early. "Sis, Dad died last night," Simone said, cold as a bank statement being read aloud in a courtroom. "He left everything to me and my husband. You get nothing." Behind her, I heard my brother-in-law Braden laugh, an actual laugh, bright and unbothered, like a man watching a football team he'd bet against finally lose. "Finally," he said. "You're out." My father set down his coffee cup very slowly, the way he used to set down a torque wrench when he'd found exactly the bolt that had been stripping an engine for a week. He leaned toward that phone, close enough that his breath fogged the screen, and he said something. I'm not going to tell you what it was yet, because Simone didn't get to hear it that morning either. My thumb was already resting on the mute button. You'll hear it exactly where she finally did. But here's what none of them knew: sitting in their kitchen counting a dead man's money before the coffee had even gone cold in his actual living hand, the funeral they were already dividing spoils over was going to happen that Sunday. And my father had picked out the flowers himself. Lilies. My mother hated lilies. He said she wouldn't mind missing this one. Welcome back to Behind Closed Doors Revenge, where quiet people finally get loud with dignity. We tell stories about family, betrayal, and justice done the right way, for everyone who has ever been underestimated at their own kitchen table. If that's you, I want you to do something for me before you even keep listening. Go check on somebody today. A parent, a grandparent, an aunt who lives alone. Just check. And then come back and finish this with me, because you are going to need every ounce of what's coming. Drop a comment below telling me where you're listening from, and subscribe, because this one runs long, and it earns every minute. 9 months earlier, in October of 2025, my biggest worry in the world was a night shift schedule. I'm a registered nurse. I was working travel contracts out of a base in Columbus, Ohio, 13 weeks here, 13 weeks there, because travel pay is how a girl from Cedar Falls kills off her nursing school loans before she turns 40 without asking anybody for help doing it. My father thought the whole arrangement was hilarious. You drive 3 states to give strangers their pills, he'd say on our Sunday calls, and I can't get you to come change my furnace filter. That was Moses Dawson, 73 years old that fall. Army, 1970 to 1974. He came home and turned wrenches for other people until 1981, then opened Dawson's Garage on Route 9 and ran it, with his own 2 hands and eventually mine on Saturdays as a kid, for 36 years. He sold it in 2017, retired at 65, and moved exactly nowhere. Same house on Maple Ridge Road he and my mother bought in 1984 and paid off, penny by penny, in 2009. He wasn't rich the way people mean it on television. He was paid off rich. Small-town rich. The kind of rich that doesn't show up in a man's shoes but shows up later, in a courthouse, in numbers nobody in the family had ever been polite enough to say out loud. My mother, Carol, died in March of 2023. I still remember the exact quality of light in that hospital room, thin, gray, the kind that makes everyone in it look older than they are. And I remember my father standing at the foot of her bed holding her feet through the blanket because somebody had told him once that circulation matters even at the end, and because touching her hands would have meant admitting how far gone she already was. I flew in for the funeral and stayed 2 weeks, and I watched my father grieve the way he fixed engines, quietly, daily, without asking anyone to watch him do it. Every Saturday night for the rest of that year, and every year since, he wound the little brass clock she kept on the mantel, because Carol always used to say a stopped clock made a house feel dead, and he was not going to let their house feel dead if there was anything at all he could do about it with his own 2 hands. He cooked simple things, the same 6 recipes she'd made him 1,000 times, learned late and imperfectly. He drove his restored 1978 F-150, bolt by bolt his own work, up and down Route 9 on Sunday afternoons like a man visiting old friends. He called me every Sunday, and I called him. We were fine. Everyone kept saying we were fine, the way people say it about a house that's actually on fire 2 rooms over, because the room they're standing in still looks normal. Then, on a bright, ordinary October afternoon, my 73-year-old father climbed a ladder to clean his own gutters, because asking for help was never, in 73 years, going to be his best event. He fell 8 feet and landed wrong. Broken right wrist, the kind that needs a small surgery, plates and pins, 6 to 8 weeks of healing. Not a tragedy. An inconvenience with hardware in it. I was mid-contract in Texas when the call came, and I still made it to the hospital in Cedar Falls inside 48 hours, because that is what you do, that is what I have always done, and it did not once occur to me, standing at airport gates in 3 different states that day, that showing up fast could be anything other than the right thing. When I walked into his hospital room, my sister Simone was already there with flowers, and her tears were arranged as carefully as the flowers were. Her husband Braden was shaking the surgeon's hand like he was closing on a duplex. Braden sells mortgages, has a voice like warm syrup poured slow, and a handshake he has clearly practiced in a mirror. "You fly back to your patients, Amber," he told me, squeezing my shoulder with the particular warmth of a man who has already decided something about you. Family takes care of family. At the time it sounded like kindness. It took me months to hear it for what it actually was, a man quietly assigning himself the keys to a house that wasn't his. I did ask questions before I left. I'm a nurse, discharge plans are my native language, the one language in my whole family I actually speak better than anyone in that hospital room. I asked to see my father's paperwork, his follow-up schedule, his medication list. Braden smiled the smile of a man who has already rehearsed the answer and said it was all handled, all filed, all at the house. Simone said, "We've got this, sweetie. You're so far away," in the voice she's used on me since we were girls, the voice that makes distance sound like a character flaw. My father, doped and cheerful in the bed, gave me a thumbs up with his good hand. "Go on, kiddo. I'm surrounded by professionals." He smiled when he said it. I have thought about that smile more times in the last year than I can count, because I know now what it actually cost him to give it to me, and how hard he was already working, without knowing it yet, to make sure I didn't stay and see what was starting to happen around him. So I flew back to Texas. I want to be honest with you about that, because it matters later, more than almost anything else in this story matters. I didn't leave because I didn't care. I left because the 2 people standing closest to him kept telling me, over and over, in 2 different voices and one shared rehearsed rhythm, that everything was handled. And one of them had already decided exactly how handled things were about to get. My father moved into Simone and Braden's place that November, 15 minutes from his own house on Maple Ridge. Just a few weeks, they said, until the cast came off. And here is where the first paper appeared, the honest one, the one I want you to hold on to, because it's the hinge this whole story swings on. His right hand was in a cast. He couldn't sign checks. He couldn't drive. So Braden brought in a notary, and my father signed a limited power of attorney, bill paying only, in his clumsy left hand, the letters wobbling like a child's. I want you to hear me clearly on this part. That document was legal, reasonable, and boring. Your own mother would have signed one. I would have. That's what makes this kind of thing work, and it's the reason I need you to really understand it before we go further. It never starts with a crime. It starts with a favor. It starts with something so small and sensible that agreeing to it feels like the loving thing to do, and by the time you understand what it actually was, you're 3 favors deep and the exits have quietly moved. Simone posted a photo that week, my father at her kitchen table, soup in front of him, a blanket over his knees though it wasn't cold. Caption, "Blessed to care for my daddy. Family is everything." 200 likes. Half of Cedar Falls commented hearts. Meanwhile, on our Sunday call, Braden was walking me through their plans and referred to the house on Maple Ridge, the house my parents had paid off penny by penny over 25 years, the house where my mother's clock still ticked on the mantel every night, as the asset. Dropped casually, the way you'd mention the weather. I noticed it. I even said, "You mean the house?" And he laughed, easy as anything, and said, "Realtor brain, sorry. I let it go. I have replayed letting it go more times than I can count." My father noticed things too, he told me much later, in a voice that still shook slightly at the memory. He noticed Braden brought the power of attorney papers to his bedside instead of the kitchen table, where every real decision in that house had ever been made. He noticed the pen was already uncapped and waiting on the blanket before he'd even finished reading. His wrist ached that morning, the pain pills made everything feel like a matter for tomorrow, soft and postponable, and the paper in front of him said what it said, bills only, and he read it twice, the way he read everything, and he signed it. It was the last thing they ever brought him to sign at his own bedside, in the light, where he could still see clearly. Everything after that happened somewhere he couldn't see it happen at all. Then the wall went up, one polite brick at a time. My Sunday calls started landing on Simone instead of Dad. "He's napping. He's tired, hun, I'll tell him you called." 3 weeks straight, I did not hear my father's actual voice, not once, not for a single minute. His old flip phone broke, or so I was told, so I bought him a smartphone, set it up myself, loaded my number into it with my own thumbs, and shipped it to Simone's house. The package went missing. I shipped a second one, tracking number and all this time. "Delivered," said the confirmation email. "Oh, that," Simone said, breezy as a screen door. "Dad didn't want it. You know how he is with technology." My father rebuilt a carburetor the year he turned 70. He is not afraid of a telephone. He has never once in his life been afraid of a telephone. I knew something was off. I want that on the record, clearly, because I have spent a great deal of this year forgiving myself for not acting on it sooner, and I want you to hear that the knowing came early, even if the doing came late. I asked to talk to him directly. I offered to schedule a video call. I asked which doctor was following his wrist so I could call the office myself and confirm his progress the way I would for any patient of my own. And every single time, I hit the same soft wall. "He's resting. We've got it. Why are you being like this?" Here is the thing nobody tells you about situations like ours, and I need you to understand it, because it is the reason this went on as long as it did. When a grown man is legally competent, and his caregivers say he's fine, a daughter 2 states away has no lever to pull. There is no agency you call, no form you file, because your sister keeps answering the phone in a voice that sounds, on the surface, entirely reasonable. I was a nurse under contract, 13 weeks locked in with loans still hanging over my head, and the only 2 people inside that house kept smiling at me through every single crack I tried to widen. Simone ended one of those calls with a line I have never once forgotten, and never will. "You chose your career, Amber. Let the people who stayed handle it." I flew home for Christmas anyway. And at that dinner table, my father's chair had been moved to the corner. Christmas of 2025. My father had just turned 74 that December, and the cast was finally off, but something else had been fitted onto him in its place, a smallness, a kind of careful shrinking I had never once seen on him in 34 years of being his daughter. He sat in the corner of Simone's living room while she answered questions aimed directly at him. "Dad, how's the wrist?" "It's healing great, isn't it, Daddy?" He was thinner. Quieter. His coffee, I noticed, was decaf, doctor's orders, Simone said, though no doctor of his had ever actually said any such thing, and I would find that out for certain 5 months later, standing in a bank lobby with 11 pages of printed statements shaking very slightly in my hands. I got him alone for 10 minutes on the back porch, both of us pretending we needed air in 30-degree weather because it was the only lie either of us could tell that got us somewhere private. He looked at me sideways, with the old spark still flickering somewhere behind his eyes, and said, "My checkbook's been on a diet, kiddo." I asked what he meant. He told me the statements used to come to the house on Maple Ridge, now everything was paperless, and the passwords lived with Braden. He'd asked to see the accounts twice. Both times, Braden had clapped him on the shoulder, warm as ever, and said, "That's what you got me for." I felt something cold move through my chest standing on that porch, my father's breath fogging in the dark beside mine, and I want to tell you honestly, some part of me already knew, right then, exactly what I was looking at. I just did not yet have a single piece of paper to prove it. My father has never in his life asked anyone for help twice about the same thing unless something was actually wrong. He is a man who fixes his own gutters at 73 rather than dial a phone. Hearing him say twice about his own bank accounts should have sent me straight to a lawyer's office that same week. Instead, I stood there in the cold, breath fogging, and told myself it was a family misunderstanding, the same way I'd told myself every other soft, small warning sign was a misunderstanding, for months, because the alternative, that my sister and her husband were quietly taking my father apart while smiling for photographs, was not a thought my heart wanted to hold yet. I have forgiven myself for a great many things this year. That particular 10 minutes on that porch is still, some nights, the hardest one to let go of. I went back inside and asked Simone, calmly, in the kitchen, if we could all sit down after the holidays and go over Dad's finances together, as a family, the way any family should. Braden materialized in the doorway like he'd been summoned by the word finances itself. "Family doesn't need lawyers, Amber," he said, smiling, "unless you're accusing somebody. Notice the move, because I've replayed it 100 times since." I asked about statements. He introduced the word lawyers, out of nowhere, before anyone had said it. Then Simone started crying, right on schedule, about everything she does, about how nobody appreciates the person who stayed, about how hard this has all been on her, her voice climbing into that particular register that has always, since we were children, made me feel like the villain in a story I hadn't been told I was in. And my father, because he is decent, and because decent men make the softest hostages of all, reached over and patted my arm. "I'm fine, kiddo. Don't start a war at Christmas." I didn't start a war at Christmas. I flew back to Texas on January 6th and signed another 13-week contract. I have signed a great deal of paperwork in my nursing career. That was the single most expensive signature of mine you will hear about tonight, and I did not know it at the time, and that not knowing is the part one still, some nights, cannot entirely forgive myself for. By February, the Sunday calls had gone from screen to scripted, and I had had enough. I took 4 days off between shifts, told nobody I was coming, and flew home, my own quiet ambush of love, I told myself on the plane, smiling at the idea of it, at the thought of walking in and simply seeing my father's face light up the way it always used to. Simone opened her door surprised, and recovered fast, the way she has always recovered fast. "Oh, no, you just missed him. He's on an overnight fishing trip with the VFW boys." "Bad timing, sweetie." "Fishing. In Ohio. In February." I stood there in the cold on her front step and felt something in my chest go very still and very quiet, the way it does right before a code, that particular silence your body learns to recognize before your mind has caught up to what it means. I drove to Dad's house on Maple Ridge anyway and stood in the yard a while. Grass gone shaggy under a skin of frost. Mailbox stuffed past its hinge. Curtains shut tight in every window, the whole house holding its breath like it was hiding from someone too. On the way out of town, I stopped for gas and ran into Earl Prescott, my father's oldest friend, 75 years old, ran the Prescott Funeral Home for 4 decades before his sons took it over, buried half of Cedar Falls with his own 2 hands and cried, quietly, at most of them. Earl looked at me strangely across the pump island. "Moses hasn't been to a post meeting in 3 months, honey. We figured he'd moved in with you. Not fishing. Not with them at all." I called Simone from the gas station lot, my hands not quite steady on the phone. She didn't even pause. "Oh, it's not the VFW crowd. It's his other buddies. You don't know them." A lie stacked neatly on a lie, like cordwood, like she had an endless supply and had never once had to reach for the bottom of the pile. I flew back to Texas with my stomach in a knot that would not loosen for months. 3 days later, Simone texted me a photo, Dad in an armchair, smiling thinly, holding that day's mood hostage. "Dad's doing great. Stop checking up on us." I stared at that picture a long time, on the runway, in the terminal, in a rental car, the way you stare at an X-ray you know is hiding something you can't quite name yet. There was a detail in it, small, ordinary, right there in the background, that I would not understand for another 5 months. When I finally did understand it, it changed how I saw every single photograph she had ever sent me. My contract ended the first week of May 2026, and I came home to Columbus with a plan already forming: drive to Cedar Falls unannounced and refuse to leave without seeing my father with my own eyes, in daylight, for as long as it took. The phone rang before I'd even unpacked my bag. June Hetler, a nurse I'd worked med-surg with years earlier, 58 years old, sharp as a lancet, the kind of woman who notices everything and forgives most of it, which is a rarer combination than you'd think in our line of work. She'd taken a job at a long-term care facility called Cresthaven Manor, out near the Indiana line, 170 miles from my kitchen. Her voice was careful in a way I recognized instantly, the voice we use with families right before we say something that is going to break a room open. Amber. There's a resident here, came in back in March. He asks every nurse, on every shift, if they know a nurse named Amber. Says she's his daughter. I could not speak. I stood in the middle of my own kitchen, keys still cutting into my palm, and I could not make a single word come out of my mouth. June kept going, gentle, professional, the way you keep going for a family that has just gone quiet on the other end of a very bad phone call. His name is Moses Dawson, honey. Is that your father? Nobody, not once, in 7 months, not in any call, not in any text, not in a single sentence anyone in my family had spoken to me, had said the words nursing home. As far as I had been told, my father was eating pot roast 15 minutes from his own house, surrounded, in Braden's own words, by people who loved him. June said one more thing before I hung up, and it is the thing that put me in the car with my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my teeth. Amber, he doesn't present like a placement. He presents like somebody misplaced him. I did not call Simone. I did not call Braden. There are conversations you have by phone, and there are conversations you have in person, in daylight, with paperwork in your hand and your own 2 eyes as witness. I got in the car. Before I tell you what I found in that building, I want to say this to every single one of you listening who has an aging parent, because I would trade almost anything to have asked this question 6 months earlier than I did. Ask them today, kindly, over coffee, who holds your power of attorney? Have you seen your own bank statement this month? Not to accuse anyone. Just to know. It is the one question I did not ask in time, and it cost my father everything but his life. If this story is hitting somewhere tender in you right now, take 2 seconds and hit subscribe, because what my father did when he finally got out of that building deserves witnesses, and you are going to want to be one of them. 3 hours of highway, and I spent every single mile of it being a nurse, because being a daughter would have put me in a ditch. I made myself run the checklist the way I run it on every shift: vitals, orientation, skin integrity, medication reconciliation, because if I let myself think, even once, about what I might find, I was not sure my hands would stay steady on the wheel. Cresthaven Manor sat back off a county road behind a sign with 2 burned-out letters, the kind of building that has learned to look forgettable on purpose. Inside, the smell hit first, cheap disinfectant laid thin over something older and sadder underneath it. A call light blinking down the hall with nobody moving toward it. A television talking to a row of empty chairs like it had given up expecting an audience. I counted staff the way I count on every unit I have ever walked onto in my career, 1 aide for a wing that needed 4. The medication cart parked and locked at 11 in the morning, the 9 o'clock med still signed out as pending. I don't say any of this to shame the aides, understaffed people cannot pour from an empty building, and I have been that exhausted aide myself, more nights than I can count. I say it because my father had been living inside that exhaustion for 10 weeks while my sister posted, from a warm kitchen 15 minutes away, about family being everything. He was in a shared room at the end of the East Hall, second bed by a window that didn't open. My father, Moses Dawson, who once carried an engine block across a shop floor out of pure stubbornness rather than wait for help, was maybe 15 pounds lighter, gray stubble roughening his jaw, wearing a shirt I didn't recognize that fit him like a borrowed apology. But his eyes came up the second the door opened, and his eyes were still his eyes, sharp, whole, entirely present, the same eyes that used to watch me work a wrench as a girl and correct my grip without a word. He looked at me a long second. And what he said first broke something in me worse than any tears could have. "Took you long enough, kiddo," he said, and his voice cracked right down the middle of it. "They told me you knew. Told me you signed off on it. I want you to sit with that sentence the way I had to. They hadn't just hidden him from me. They had hidden me from him, told each of us, separately, in 2 different rooms, that the other one had agreed to all of it." I crossed that room and I put my arms around my father and I felt him shake, actually shake, this man who had never once in my life let me see him cry, not at my mother's funeral, not at his own diagnosis of a bad hip 5 years back, not through anything, and I stood there holding him in a shared room at the end of a hallway that smelled like bleach and abandonment, and I cried harder than I had cried since I was 9 years old and fell off my bike in front of the whole street. I am not ashamed to tell you that. I have been strong for other people's families my entire adult life, on shift after shift, holding hands at bedsides that weren't mine to hold, and I had absolutely nothing left to hold back with when it was finally my own father's hand shaking in mine. His roommate, Gus, the one who yelled at the ceiling after dark, went quiet in the next bed and watched us the whole time with an expression I couldn't quite place until my father told me, later, that Gus hadn't had a visitor in 14 months. I have thought about that man more than I probably should, given everything else that happened that year. I think about him some nights still, in that room with the window that doesn't open, waiting for a visitor who never comes, while my father at least, in the end, got his back. Not everyone in these places does. I want you to remember that too, somewhere in the middle of this story, because it's true, and because it's the reason I still go back to Crest Haven twice a year now, just to sit with whoever doesn't have anybody else sitting with them that afternoon. My father comes with me most times. He says it's the least a jailbreak owes the place it broke out of. We spent an hour untangling 7 months of careful lying, and every single knot had the same 2 sets of fingerprints on it. His flip phone hadn't broken, Simone had taken it, she'd told him, to protect him from scam calls. My smartphones had never once reached him, he'd never heard about either package, never known they existed. My letters, and I had sent 4, never made it past whoever was collecting the mail at that house. Back in March, Braden had told him they needed him out of the house for just 2 weeks, while they repaired the guest room floor. The 2 weeks came and went. When Dad pushed, Braden's answers got shorter and shorter, until one day the answer was a hallway at Crest Haven and a roommate named Gus who yelled at the ceiling after dark, and through all of it, they had told him, told my father, this man who built a business with his hands and raised 2 daughters and never once in his life needed anyone to explain himself to him, that I knew. That I was too busy. That his own daughter, the nurse, couldn't be bothered. He kept a torn corner of an envelope in his wallet with my old cell number penciled onto it, the only number they hadn't managed to cancel or misplace or lose, but the hall phone required staff to dial out, and staff at Crest Haven were, in every practical sense, a rumor. I did what I do. I asked him the date, the month, the president. I had him count backward from 100 by 7s, just to watch him roll his eyes at me the way he has since I was in nursing school quizzing him at Thanksgiving. It's Tuesday, he said. I'm in purgatory. And your quiz is easier than one of Braden's mortgage pitches. Sharp as ever. There was nothing wrong with my father's mind, not one thing, and that fact was about to matter enormously, more than either of us understood yet, sitting in that room with the window that didn't open. Then he glanced at the door, lowered his voice, and said the sentence that turned my grief into something colder and steadier underneath it. Kiddo. Whatever paper they used to put me in here, I never signed a second one. I walked to the front office with my RN license number ready in my mouth and my nurse voice on, the one I use in rooms where somebody's trying to slow walk a patient's rights. The administrator was a tired man with a tie the color of oatmeal, and he recited the script he'd been handed. Only the responsible party could authorize a transfer, and the responsible party was Mr. Braden Voss, who held power of attorney. I asked him one question. Does Mr. Dawson have a diagnosis of cognitive impairment on file? Dementia, incapacity, anything? Silence, while he clicked through a screen. There wasn't one. There isn't one, because none exists. My father had been admitted as a voluntary placement, on paperwork submitted by his POA, with a vague letter about needing support with daily living. A competent adult is not a package in storage. He can discharge himself. Full stop. I said it politely, and then, because the tie kept opening and closing his mouth without producing anything useful, I added, or we can call the long-term care ombudsman together and walk through the intake file page by page. I have the afternoon. It is remarkable how fast paperwork appears when you offer to read it out loud with a state official on the line. 20 minutes later, my father sat at that desk and signed his own discharge. Right-handed, healed, unhurried, letters carved clean, the M leaning left the way it has since 1974. First thing I've signed in 6 months, he said to the room, and something in his voice cracked open into an actual laugh for the first time all day, and it's a jailbreak. June hugged him at the door and tucked a sleeve of cookies from the staff room into his jacket pocket like contraband, and I watched my father, 74 years old, walk out through a set of automatic doors he had not been able to walk through of his own free will in 70 days, and I had to stop in the parking lot and put both hands on the hood of my car and just breathe for a minute, because the relief was so much bigger than my chest had room for. The facility would notify the POA by certified mail. The administrator said, fine, and I said, mail takes days. On the drive home, somewhere past the county line, Dad watched the fields peel by in the last of the light and said quietly, they think I'm filed away, kiddo. Let's not correct them just yet. I glanced over at him, and for the first time in 10 weeks, I saw something in his face that looked less like a man who had survived something, and more like a man who was already 3 moves ahead of the people who had put him there. I set him up in my apartment in Columbus. My couch pulled out into a bed. His blood pressure pills refilled. I set him up in my apartment in Columbus. My couch pulled out into a bed. His blood pressure pills refilled. Real coffee, caffeinated, doctor's orders be damned, and I made it for him myself the first morning, and he drank it slow, at my little kitchen table, looking around at my apartment like a man reacquainting himself with the idea that rooms could belong to people who loved him. Then we went to a bank branch together, because Moses Dawson was still the account holder of record, and an account holder is entitled to his own statements, whatever anyone else believes. The printout was 11 pages. He read them the way he used to read a diagnostic report on a wrecked engine, slow, twice through, no cursing, his jaw working the same small muscle it worked whenever he found a problem worse than he'd expected. In 5 months, November through March, $187,000 had left my father's accounts. $46,000 of it labeled care expenses, for a man eating instant potatoes at Crest Haven Manor. $89,000 wired to something called BV Capital LLC, you can guess whose initials those are. $52,000 to a loan servicer attached to a condo in Florida that Simone and Braden had bought in 2022, at the very top of the market. $25,000 remained. A working man's. I watched my father's hands as he read those numbers, and I want to describe them to you exactly, because I don't think I will ever forget it. They didn't shake. They went still, the particular stillness of a man holding something so he doesn't drop it, the same stillness I've seen in family members at a bedside right after a doctor finishes a sentence they weren't ready for. He read the total 3 times, quietly moving his finger down the column the way he used to run a finger down a torque spec sheet, checking and rechecking a number that refused to change no matter how many times he asked it to. And then, very softly, almost too soft for me to catch it, he said, 36 years in that garage. Every one of them. Not the money, the years. Every oil change, every timing belt, every Saturday he'd spend on his back under somebody else's truck so that he and my mother could one day stop worrying about money altogether, all of it converted, in 5 quiet months, into somebody else's condo mortgage. I had to step out into the bank lobby for a minute after that, because I did not want him to see me cry before he'd finished having his own reaction to it first. He deserved that much privacy, even in a public building, even with a teller 2 counters away pretending not to notice either of us, and stapled behind the statements, a courtesy copy of something worse. A home equity line of credit application on the Maple Ridge house, $150,000, pending approval, signed Moses Dawson, dated April 14. On April 14, my father was 170 miles away, asking nurses on every shift if anyone knew his daughter. I called Simone that night. One call, one chance, and I kept my voice as level as I could manage, though my whole hand was shaking around the phone. "Tell me your side. I'm listening." What she said back told me everything about where her heart had actually gone. "You were never really in this family, Amber. Don't you dare lecture the one who stayed." I sat on my kitchen floor after that call ended, my back against the cabinets, and I let myself cry the way I hadn't let myself cry since Crest Haven, for my mother, who would have been ashamed, for my father, who deserved so much better than either of his daughters had managed to give him these past 2 years, and, if I'm honest, a little bit for the sister I used to have, who taught me to ride a bike and curled my hair for prom, who felt, that night, as gone from my life as if she really had been the one who died. My father found me there 20 minutes later, still on the floor, and he didn't ask what was wrong. He'd heard my half of the call through the wall, and he knew. He didn't try to fix it with words either. He just sat down next to me on the kitchen floor, 74 years old, easing himself down slow against the same cabinets, and put his arm around me the way he used to when I was small and had scraped a knee too deep for a simple kiss to fix. We sat there a long while, not talking, just 2 people who'd both just lost the same sister at the same time, in 2 different ways, on the same night. Eventually he said, so quiet I almost missed it, "She's not gone, kiddo. She's just choosing to be somebody I don't recognize yet. Those aren't always the same thing." I didn't believe him that night. I have come, slowly, over the months since, to understand that he was right, and that believing it was the only thing that let either of us keep any tenderness at all for what came next. So we stopped asking family for answers. We hired a woman whose entire job is paperwork. Patricia Whitfield, elder law, 61 years old, reading glasses on a chain and a handshake like a filing cabinet closing. Her office smelled like toner and lemon drops. She listened to the whole story without moving a muscle, and then said the sentence that made my father fall professionally in love with her on the spot. "Documents don't cry, Mr. Dawson. That's why I like them." She moved fast, and completely legally, and I want you to hear the order of it, because this is the part that protects real people in real situations like ours. First, Dad signed a notarized revocation of every power of attorney in existence, delivered to the bank, the county recorder, and every institution he had ever touched in his life. Second, a signature dispute letter to the Hellick lender, which froze that application exactly where it stood. No money had moved yet, which meant the house was still clean, still his, still standing at the end of Maple Ridge with my mother's clock silent on the mantel, waiting. Third, a report to Adult Protective Services and a fraud affidavit with the bank, both of which start clocks that even a smooth talker cannot stop once they're running. Then Patricia laid out the problem plainly, the way good lawyers do, without softening it for either of our feelings. Civil recovery, I can get you. Criminal intent is harder. He'll say Dad authorized everything verbally. These men always say that. And buried in the bank's file was the thing we hadn't had before, a second power of attorney, full financial authority, notarized January 12, submitted that same month. The one Dad never signed. Patricia slid it across the desk, and I watched my father's hands go very still on top of it. For criminal charges, it helps enormously if they use a forged instrument again, somewhere public, somewhere witnessed. Fraud in a drawer is a lawsuit. Fraud performed for an audience is a conviction. My father studied that page for a long, quiet minute, the loops of a signature that wasn't his, sitting on top of his own name, and I watched something move across his face that I can only describe as grief finally finding a place to stand still. Then he looked up and asked me to bring him his army discharge papers. We drove to Cedar Falls on a Tuesday morning, when Braden would be at his office selling somebody a 30-year promise he had no intention of keeping himself. My key still fit the back door of the Maple Ridge house, some oversights or gifts. Inside, the air was stale in a way that felt like an insult to him, standing there breathing it in. The file drawers in the den hung open, picked over. My mother's suitcase sat unzipped on the guest bed, her good jewelry box empty beside it. And on the mantel, Carol's little brass clock stood dead at some long-gone afternoon, because no one had wound it in 7 months. My father stood in the middle of his own living room like a man visiting a museum built entirely out of his own life. 7 months, he said, so quietly I almost missed it. The house doesn't even smell like mine anymore. I watched his shoulders come down, just slightly, the way a man's shoulders come down right before he lets himself feel something he's been holding off, and I reached over and took his hand, and we stood there together for a moment in that cold, stale living room, not saying anything at all. Then he went to the bedroom, knelt, slow but steady, and pulled his old army footlocker out from under the bed. Still locked. The one thing in that entire house Braden hadn't managed to crack open, because to a man like Braden, an old soldier's box looks like nothing worth the trouble. Inside, everything sat in order, squared away like it was 1974. His DD-214 discharge papers, his true signature inked when he was 22 years old. The original deed to the house. His medals, wrapped in a handkerchief. And a letter, the envelope gone soft with handling, marked in my mother's round, careful hand, for Moses, when I can't say it myself. He didn't open that one right there. He carried the whole footlocker to the kitchen and set it on the table where every big decision in our family had ever been made, and he laid the forged power of attorney down next to his discharge papers, side by side, 52 years apart. And then my father went very, very quiet, and I have learned, over the last year, to pay very close attention when quiet men get quieter. He compared the two signatures under the kitchen light for a long time. The M in Moses leaning hard left on the 1974 discharge papers, like a man walking straight into wind. The crossbar of the T in Dawson dragging long past the letter, a tail on it always, ink pressed deep. I sign like I mean it, he said, almost to himself. And then the second signature, the January 12th power of attorney, round, even, polite. Every letter behaving prettier than I ever wrote in my whole life, he said, tapping it. Even before the wrist. But handwriting wasn't the knife, he told me. The date was the knife. I had already pulled his medical records. He'd signed a release making me his healthcare contact the day after the jailbreak. And on January 12th, my father had been at the orthopedic clinic from 9 in the morning until 11:30, having hardware checked under light sedation, initialed and by a medical assistant at every single step. The notary stamp on that power of attorney claimed it had been executed at 10:15 that same morning, at an office 20 miles away. A man cannot be sedated in one town and signing his name in another. The paper didn't just lie. The paper told on itself. My father sat back, and something in his face settled, grief clocking out, and a decision clocking in, right there at the kitchen table. Dead men don't sign papers, he said. I asked him what he meant. Their notary friend stamped a ghost, kiddo. So let's introduce them to a real one. Then he opened my mother's letter at last, alone, by the window, his back to me, his shoulders bent over the paper in a way that told me he was crying without needing to see his face to know it. I gave him that privacy, some things a daughter doesn't intrude on, even when every instinct in her wants to go hold her father while he grieves a wife 2 years gone and a betrayal 2 years in the making, all at once, in the same quiet minute. When he came back to the table, his eyes were red-rimmed and clear, and he only shared one line of that letter with me. Don't you let the quiet ones fool you, he read, and don't you dare go quiet yourself. He folded it back into its envelope and put it in his shirt pocket, over his heart, and he has carried it there, he told me later, every single day since the certified letter from Crest Haven landed in the boss mailbox that Friday, and my phone started detonating before noon. Braden, voicemail 1, syrup gone, all vinegar underneath it. You have removed an at-risk senior from a care facility without authorization. That's kidnapping, Amber. Kidnapping. A mortgage broker quoting law is a dog quoting the mailman, but I'll grant him this, he'd learned the vocabulary fast. Voicemail 3 threatened an emergency guardianship petition. Dad was confused, declining, being manipulated by a daughter after his money. Read that sentence again and appreciate the craftsmanship of it. Accuse the other side of the exact crime sitting in your own pocket. Patricia was serene through all of it. Guardianship requires an independent medical evaluation. Your father will pass it like a driving test. But she didn't sugarcoat the rest of it either. A contested guardianship takes weeks, gets loud, smears everyone involved, and here was the real play underneath it: it buys time. Time for a frozen hellet to thaw if the dispute hiccuped. Time to move whatever was left. Men like Braden, she told us, don't fight to win. They fight to keep the clock running while the money finds the exits. That night, Simone sent me a single text. No greeting. Dad will choose us. He always needs the ones who stay. You've got a career and an empty apartment. He'll figure out which daughter actually built a life around him. I read it out loud to my father, because we had agreed, no more secrets managed on his behalf by anyone, ever again, not even by me, not even with good intentions. He looked at it a long moment, then out the window, then said, in the mildest voice you have ever heard a wounded man use, she thinks staying close to a man is the same as standing by him. He handed me back the phone. Call Earl. Tell him I finally need that favor he's owed me since 1976. He laid it out at my kitchen table at 9 o'clock that night. Over decaf he poured himself as a joke between us. They need me incapacitated or dead to finish this, he said. Guardianship's their incapacitated play, slow, public. So let's give them the other option. The one with better catering. I actually laughed. And then I saw his eyes and stopped, because he meant it completely. Let them believe he had died. Not a fake death certificate. Not a false report to any agency. Not an obituary in any paper. He'd already thought through every line, quietly, on his own, and refused to cross a single one that would have made either of us into the kind of people Braden was. No government paper falsified. No insurance touched. No officer of the law lied to. Just one phone call, friend to family, and a memorial his own Post brothers would throw for him, the way they've done for every one of their own for 60 years. Lying to liars isn't a felony, kiddo, he said. I checked twice. The logic underneath it was pure Patricia, even though she never touched the theatrics of it herself. Greed is a reflex, not a decision. Tell Simone and Braden the man is gone, and they will not pause to grieve. They will produce that forged will and claim the estate in front of God and everybody, because they cannot afford probate questions later, once real lawyers start asking. Using a forged document in public, out loud, to witnesses, has an ugly legal name, and it comes with handcuffs. They wouldn't be trapped by us. They'd be trapped by their own paperwork, finally doing exactly what it had always been built for. I sat with it, and my old habit spoke first, the one that thinks I am responsible for every outcome in every room I stand in. If this goes sideways, you're the one they'll call crazy. They'll use it in the guardianship. He nodded like he'd already been there in his own head a dozen times. I've been called worse by better. Then he smiled, and for just a second, sitting there in his undershirt at my kitchen table at 9 at night, he was 50 again. We just need a man the whole town believes. Lucky for us, I know the fella who buried half of it. Earl Prescott listened to the whole plan on his back porch, a coffee going cold in his hand, and when my father finished talking, Earl was silent about 5 seconds, which, for Earl, is a filibuster. I buried 4 mayors, he finally said, and one man I truly didn't care for. This will be my first rehearsal. That's how the old guard says yes. What Earl didn't say that evening, but told me himself months later, over coffee at his own kitchen table, was that he'd buried my mother too, with his own hands, the way he'd buried nearly everyone else Moses Dawson had ever loved, and that watching his oldest friend nearly disappear the same quiet way, piece by piece, without so much as a service to mark it, had put something in his chest he hadn't felt since Vietnam. "I've spent 40 years making sure this town says a proper goodbye to its people," he told me, turning his cup slowly on the table. "I wasn't about to let two con artists steal your daddy's goodbye out from under him while he was still standing right there to hear it." I think about that sentence often. I think it's the truest thing anyone said to me that whole year, and it came from a man whose entire profession is built around the ends of things, choosing, instead, to help stage a beginning. Understand who these men are to each other, because it matters. Earl ran the Prescott Funeral Home for 40 years, his word on a passing is gospel in 3 counties. His sons run it now, but nobody in Cedar Falls would ever question Earl Prescott himself calling with sad news, which is exactly why he had to be the one to make the call. One call, only to Simone, personal, quiet. Her father collapsed, and he was gone. Every word deniable, if it ever came to that, as a misunderstanding between old men, nowhere near an official record. June's part was even cleaner. If anyone phoned Crest Haven asking after Moses Dawson, she would confirm only what was true: Mr. Dawson is no longer with us here, and let a guilty imagination do the rest of the heavy lifting on its own. The VFW would host a memorial gathering that Sunday, organized by his Post brothers, the same way they've organized it for every one of their own for 60 straight years. And Patricia would know nothing about any theatrics, officially or actually. She'd simply attend a community memorial as a guest, the way small-town lawyers do, with her briefcase, because she never goes anywhere without it. If certain documents happen to be waved around in public, well, she'd be there, with the real ones. Earl asked my father one final logistics question. "What flowers?" "Lilies," Dad said. Carol hated lilies. She won't mind missing this one. Now, I know some of you are yelling at your screens right now, "Just sue them, Amber." We could have. We'd likely have one, in 2 years, quietly, in a beige hallway somewhere, with nobody watching. But my father wanted more than his money back. He wanted his town, the town that had known him for 74 years, buried his wife, bought his tools, waved at his truck on Sunday drives, to see exactly who these two people were, with their own eyes, in real time. If you've ever watched a smooth talker fool every room he walks into, you already know exactly why that mattered so much to him. Stay with me. The funeral's coming, and trust me, you want a front row seat. Subscribe now, because you do not want to walk in late to this part. Thursday, 7 in the evening. Earl made the call from his porch with Dad and me listening on speaker, 3 feet away, my father attending the announcement of his own death with his arms crossed, like a man auditing a repair estimate he already suspected was inflated. Earl's voice did the thing 4 decades of practice does, that soft, settling tone that has carried bad news up 1,000 front walks in this county. "Simone, honey. It's Earl Prescott. It's about your father. He collapsed this evening. Sweetheart, I'm so sorry. He's gone." And then we all heard it. The pause. 3 full seconds. And into that pause, my sister did not say, "Where is he?" Did not say, "Was he in pain?" Did not say, "Oh, God, not Daddy." My sister's first question, breathed out over what I will swear on my mother's grave was relief, was, where was he staying? Was anything with him? Papers, papers. My father's face didn't move. His hand did, knuckles whitening around his coffee cup, just once, then easing, slow, the way a man absorbs a grief standing up because sitting down would mean admitting how much it actually weighs. Earl, bless him, never broke stride. The Post brothers would handle everything, he said. A memorial Sunday at the VFW hall, no cost to the family. As for papers, well, he supposed some lawyer somewhere had whatever there was. Bait floated as gentle as a fly on a stream. Simone said thank you in a voice already 3 rooms away, doing math. She did not ask to see her father's body. She did not ask a single question about him, only about what he'd left behind, as if the man himself were packaging to be inventoried. We found out later, from phone records, what happened 23 minutes after that call ended. Braden dialed the Hellick lender's office line at 7:41 that same night and left a voicemail asking about disbursement timelines. Grief has a schedule, apparently. His runs on business hours. Which brings us back to where I started. Friday, 6:30 in the morning. My kitchen in Columbus. Bacon in the pan, my father across the table stealing it off my plate the exact same way he had every morning since he'd come to stay with me. The phone lit up. Simone. I put it on speaker and set it on the table between us, next to the coffee. You know the words by now, but hear them again knowing what I knew, standing there. Sis, Dad died last night. Flat. Not one tear in it, not one crack. He left everything to me and my husband. You get nothing. And Braden, close to the phone, wanting me to hear him, finally. You're out. I understood, later, what that call actually was, because it took me a second even standing right there in it. She wasn't notifying me of a death. She was serving me an eviction, from the family, from the estate, from the whole story of who we'd ever been to each other. Before I could ask a single question about paperwork, the claim came first. The claim always comes first with people like them. My father set his cup down without a sound. He leaned in toward that phone, close enough that the steam off his coffee fogged the screen, and he said something, quiet, level, final. You haven't heard it yet, because Simone didn't hear it that morning either. My thumb was resting on the mute button, and it had been since I answered, because we had agreed the trap needed 2 more days in the ground. What he said was for Sunday. She'd hear it standing up, in front of everyone. And so will you. Into the live line, I made my voice small and said I needed time, that I'd come Sunday, to the memorial. Simone's last instruction before she hung up, and I am quoting her exactly, fine. But don't you bring some lawyer to a funeral, Amber. Have some class. I said, understood. They gave us Saturday, and they spent it exactly like themselves. By 9 that morning, Simone had posted a black and white photo of Dad to Facebook. Rest easy, Daddy. Your girl was with you till the end. A heart emoji. 200 reactions by lunch. Casseroles pledged in the comments. Candle emojis from women who'd known my mother at church. With you till the end of what? I remember thinking, staring at my phone with my jaw aching from clenching it. The end of his checking account. And here is where I finally understood the photo from February, the one she'd texted me with stop checking up on us. Same armchair. Same wall behind him. And on that wall, a clock reading 7 minutes past 4. The exact same 7 minutes past 4 as in this new memorial photo. The same shirt on my father in both. Every single proof of life she had ever sent me had come from one single afternoon, one staged sitting, cropped and reserved for months, doled out like leftovers whenever I pushed too hard. He had been gone from that house since March. Her photographs never once knew it. While she posted, Braden worked. A neighbor on Maple Ridge, Dottie Crayons, who'd watched that street for 40 years, called me confused, a van in Dad's driveway, a man drilling out the locks. Saturday. Before any funeral had even been held. Changing the locks on a dead man's house before they'd even buried him. Patricia added the timestamp of Dottie's call to a folder that was getting thicker by the hour. June reported in 2, someone had phoned Crest Haven, asking for records for the estate. The estate. The body wasn't even cold, mostly because it was sitting at my kitchen table eating a BLT and watching the evening news. Dad took in all of it calmly, and then spent the evening polishing his good shoes and hanging his one dark suit on the closet door. Every man should look sharp at his own funeral, he said, and I heard, underneath the joke, something that made my throat tighten, a man getting ready to bury, in front of a whole town, not a body, but a lie that had nearly buried him alive. First Sunday came. 60 folding chairs, one closed casket, and my sister walked in wearing brand new shoes, carrying a folder. The VFW hall on a Sunday afternoon, flags at the front, the honor board with its brass names catching the light, 60 folding chairs in rows on an old wood floor that creaks confessions out of everybody who walks across it. Earl had dressed the room like the professional he is. A casket at the front, closed, borrowed from the showroom floor, and nobody questions a closed casket at a memorial, because nobody wants to. A photo of Dad in uniform, 1972, cocky as sunrise. And lilies, God help me, lilies everywhere, exactly as he'd asked. The whole town came. Post brothers in their caps. Maple Ridge neighbors. My mother's church circle with foil-covered dishes waiting for after. Dotty crayons in her good coat. June slipped in at the back. Patricia sat in the corner, briefcase on her knees like a house cat bothering no one. Dad and I were in the storage room behind the stage, through a side door, sightline through a hinge gap, close enough to hear the chairs creak. My job was to stand in that dark with my own folder of true things and keep my breathing even. And I want to be honest with you, my hands were cold the whole time. His weren't. Simone entered like a widow in a photograph. Black dress with the tags freshly cut off. New shoes. Tissue at the ready, crying precisely when observed and recovering the instant she wasn't. Braden worked the room in his closer suit, gripping shoulders, accepting condolences like deposits, a folder of his own tucked under one arm. They took the front row. Of course they took the front row. At 2:00, Earl stepped to the little podium, cleared his throat with ceremony, and said the sentence we had built the entire trap around. Before we share our memories of Moses, the family has asked to say a few words about his affairs. His affairs. They had requested it themselves, that very morning, lambs volunteering for the spit. Braden took the podium the way he takes everything, like it had been holding his place for him. He gripped both sides, bowed his head a beat for effect, and began. Moses was family, and family honors a man's wishes. Then he opened the folder and produced it, cream paper, blue backing, a document with real weight to it. Moses had a will drawn up this past April. In it, he leaves his home on Maple Ridge Road, his accounts, and his truck, everything, to his daughter Simone, and to me. Signed April 20th, 2026. The room made a sound. Not words. Wood, 60 chairs shifting at once as 60 spines straightened. Dottie said something under her breath the way she says it about late tomatoes and bad men, and heads turned toward each other all down the rows, because everyone in that hall had heard Moses Dawson brag about his nurse kid for 3 decades, and this arithmetic did not add up to the man they knew. Braden should have stopped there. Braden has never once, in his entire life, stopped there. He raised a hand for quiet, found my face in the crowd. I'd slipped out to stand at the back wall minutes before, per the plan, and read the next line slowly, tasting it. And to my daughter Amber, I leave nothing. For reasons she knows. For reasons she knows. He read a dead man's supposed cruelty to a room full of that dead man's oldest friends, and he smiled while he did it. That smile is the single most expensive thing that man has ever worn in his life. In the corner, Patricia's thumbs undid the clasps of her briefcase without hurry. And up at the podium, Earl leaned toward the microphone, gentle as church. April 20th, you said. Strange date for a signature. The side door clicked. I watched 60 people hear it. Let me hold that door closed one more moment, because you need to know what was on the other side of it the night before. Saturday, near midnight, my kitchen. The plan spread out on the table like an engine gasket set, every piece laid in order. My old habit had one last run at us, the voice that says every disaster in every room is mine to prevent, mine to smooth over, mine to fix quietly before anyone else has to feel it. We can still just hand it all to the police Monday, I said. Clean, quiet, no stage. Dad was quiet a while. When he answered, he wasn't sharp about it. He was almost gentle. Simone said, you get nothing. Let's see what nothing looks like when it stands up and walks. Then he told me the real reason, the one underneath all the strategy, and I am going to give it to you the way he gave it to me, sitting there in his undershirt at my kitchen table with his coffee gone cold. Kiddo. They didn't steal my savings. Savings can be rebuilt, I built them once with a wrench. They stole my say. Told the town I needed storing. Told my own girl I didn't want her. Told me my own mind couldn't be trusted. A man's say is all he's actually got at 74. And I'm taking mine back, in front of everybody they lied to. That was the whole war in one paragraph, standing in my kitchen in his undershirt at midnight, and I felt my eyes fill listening to him say it, because I understood, finally, all the way down, that this was never really about the money at all, not for him. It was about being seen, one more time, exactly as he actually was. So we agreed on the rules of engagement. His rules. No shouting, no accusations from us, no speeches. I would carry the folder, statements, revocation, medical records, his discharge papers, and we would stand there and let paper do the talking, because paper had been their weapon from the very start, and there is a particular justice in being beaten by the real thing. Sunday afternoon, 2:17. The hinge gap went bright. My father's hand turned the knob, and 60 people were about to attend the shortest resurrection in Ohio history. The side door opened, and my father walked into his own memorial service. Dark suit pressed to a knife's edge, shoes like black glass, the VFW pin on his lapel catching the hall lights. He didn't hurry. Moses Dawson has never hurried for anyone in his life, and he was not about to start now, at his own funeral. One measured step, then another, the old floor announcing each one like a drumroll it had been saving up for 60 years. The room came apart in slow motion. A casserole dish slid off a side table and hit the floor with a crash nobody turned to look at, because nobody could look away from the man walking up the center aisle. One of the churchwomen crossed herself twice and sat down hard. Somebody's oxygen tank whistled. In the back, June lost the fight entirely and barked one clean laugh before clamping both hands over her mouth. Dottie said, loudly, to no one, "Well, I'll be damned," which, as far as anyone in that hall knows, is the first time in her life she said it. Simone did not scream. Simone stood up and then simply stopped operating. White as the lilies, 2 black tracks of mascara moving south while the rest of her face forgot its lines entirely. And Braden froze at that podium with the forged will still raised in his right hand, at shoulder height, in full view of 60 witnesses and 1 lawyer. A salesman photographed mid-pitch by every single eye in the room. Dad reached the podium, adjusted the microphone downward with 2 fingers the way he used to fine-tune a carburetor, and looked at the casket. Nice box, Earl. Little roomy for my taste. Then he turned, found Braden's eyes, and delivered it mild as morning. Dead men don't sign papers, son. And they surely don't drink coffee. Braden did what every cornered salesman does. He started selling, loudly. This is a sick joke, his voice cracked across the hall, syrup boiled off, nothing left but the burn underneath it. He's not competent. Look at him. This is elder confusion, he wandered off from his facility, he's been manipulated by her, his finger found me at the back wall, she took him, she's after the money, this is exactly what the guardianship was for. It is a remarkable thing, watching a man drown at a podium. 60 people had just seen my father cross a room like a colonel inspecting a parade ground. And here was Braden, explaining that the man was lost and confused. The room did not murmur agreement. The room went quiet in the specific way an audience does when it has stopped being an audience and started being a jury. Simone lunged the other direction, for sympathy. Daddy, we thought, Earl said, and then she spun on Earl, her mask slipping sideways. You lied to me. You called me. You said, and there it was, in her own voice, in front of everyone. She had been told her father was dead and had never once asked to see him. Never called the funeral home. Never asked what happened. Just booked a podium and found a folder. Nobody had trapped her into saying it out loud. Grief that skips the body and goes straight to the paperwork tells its own story, better than any lawyer ever could. I walked up the center aisle then, unhurried, and folded her against my chest, and I kept my voice at the level I use for families in waiting rooms, even though inside I felt something break and mend and break again all in the same breath, holding my sister for the first time in over a year. You were told he collapsed. You called me at 6:30 the next morning about the will. You never asked to see him. Not once. Behind me, I heard the pastor of my mother's old church stand, take his coat, and move 3 rows away from the Voss family pew. The room was choosing. Then Patricia stood up, buttoned her jacket, and spoke for the first time. Mr. Voss. May I see that document you just read to the room? What happened next took 11 minutes, and I have never enjoyed paperwork more in my entire life. Patricia walked to the front table, the one meant for the guest book, and laid out documents one at a time, announcing each in the tone of a woman reading a weather report. Notarized revocation of all powers of attorney, executed in May, on file with the county and every bank that matters. Orthopedic clinic records, January 12, Mr. Dawson, under light sedation, 9 a.m. to 11:30, staff initials at every stage. A power of attorney, notarized allegedly that same morning, 10:15, at an office 20 miles away. A man cannot be under sedation in one town and signing his name in another. Bank records. $187,000 in 5 months, including $89,000 to BV Capital LLC. She looked up, pleasantly. The B is for Braden. The V, I assume, does not stand for victim. And a home equity application on the Maple Ridge property, signed April 14, when Mr. Dawson was residing at Crest Haven Manor, 170 miles from the closing pen. Then she turned to the will itself, still in Braden's hand, dated April 20, when your father-in-law was residing at Crest Haven. Intake logs show he received no visitors that week. So tell the room, Mr. Voss, who witnessed this will? There were 2 witness signatures on that document. One belonged to a loan officer from Braden's own office, and that man was sitting in the 4th row with a casserole on his knees, come to pay his respects. He went the color of oatmeal. You told me it was routine estate stuff, Braden. You said it was a formality. His voice cracked in front of everyone, a witness to the forgery, unwitnessing himself, live. Braden made his last stand. Nobody consented to being recorded. You people set me up. Patricia, mildly, no one recorded anything, Mr. Voss. You read it into a microphone at a funeral that you scheduled speaking time for. And that is when the hall doors opened, and 2 deputies from the county sheriff's office stepped in out of the afternoon light, exactly on the schedule Patricia had arranged with the fraud unit 3 days before. Nobody got tackled, and nobody got cuffed in front of the lilies. Real life is quieter than that, and honestly, quieter is worse. The deputies came up the aisle unhurried, the way men do when the outcome is already filed, and the older one said the sentence that ends a certain kind of man's whole architecture all at once. Mr. Voss, we'd like you to come answer some questions regarding a bank fraud report and some documents. Bank's already frozen the line of credit and referred it. Won't take long to start. Bank fraud. Federal. You could watch it land on Braden and read every stage of it on his face, because a salesman only has masks, and he went through the whole drawer in 10 seconds. Outrage, this is a family matter. The deputies didn't blink. Charm, gentlemen, there's been a huge misunderstanding, let's talk offline. Nothing. And then the last mask, the real one underneath all of them, the beggar. He turned to my father, and his voice did something I had never once heard it do. It went up, thin and cracking. Moses. Moses, I'm family. I was going to pay it all back. Every cent. It was an investment, I was growing it for you, for your retirement. My father looked at him the way he used to look at an engine somebody had lied to him about, calm, diagnostic, a little sad at the waist. You had my checkbook for 7 months, son. The only thing you grew was my funeral. The hall did not laugh. It exhaled. 60 people, one breath, the sound of an entire town closing a ledger together. Then Simone broke. And I need to tell this part straight, because she is still my sister, and some of what happened in that moment I still can't watch back without my chest aching. She dropped into the front row chair like her strings had been cut, and for one moment, the performance stopped, and the actual woman looked out from behind it. We were drowning, Daddy, barely a voice at all. The condo, the cards, all of it. Brayden said it was temporary. It was only ever supposed to be temporary. And I believed her. I still do. That's the tragedy underneath the whole thing. It probably did start as temporary, the way a leak starts as a drip you tell yourself you'll get to fixing next weekend. But nobody stays sympathetic for long on that side of the room, and she proved exactly why in the very next breath, wheeling on me with her wet face twisting into something I hadn't seen since we were girls fighting over the last good seat in the car. But you made it worse, Amber. If you just stayed out of it, nobody ever had to know. There it is. Not I'm sorry. Not what did we do. Just, we'd have gotten away with it, if the family nurse hadn't checked the chart. I looked at my big sister, the one who taught me to ride a bike, who curled my hair for prom, who called me at 6:30 in the morning to tell me I was nothing, and I felt every single year of us rise up in my throat at once, and I let myself cry, right there, in front of the whole town, because I was done pretending it didn't hurt just because I'd been right. And I gave her the calmest sentence I had left in me. You called before sunrise to tell me I get nothing, sis. I'm the only one leaving this room with everything I walked in with. The deputies moved. Brayden went up the aisle between them, still explaining interest rates to men wearing badges, and my father stepped to the microphone one last time, put his hand flat on the borrowed casket, and addressed his own funeral. Folks. I apologize for the dry run. But you needed to see it. Not because I'm special, because next time, it's your house, your kids, your papers. Check them while you're still above ground. The pastor said, Amen, at a memorial for a living man. It remains, my father tells me, the proudest church moment of his entire life. The parking lot after, gravel, late sun, 2 county cars. The deputies were settling Brayden into the back of the first one. He was asking about his phone call before the door even shut, a man already drafting his own version of events. Simone walked to the second car under her own power. Nobody was arresting her that afternoon, but they had questions, and her new shoes kept catching in the gravel, that expensive click gone stumbling and arrhythmic, and something about that sound is filed in my memory forever under the word consequences. At the car door, she stopped, and she turned around. And for the first time that entire day, through the announcement, the will, the resurrection, all of it, my sister looked at our father, instead of at what he owned. Dad walked over, took his time like always, stopped about an arm's length away, and he didn't raise his voice, didn't sharpen it, didn't perform for the crowd still drifting out onto the steps behind us. He simply said to her, at last, out loud, the thing he'd said into a muted phone at my kitchen table on Friday morning at 6:31, with the steam still coming off his coffee. You buried the wrong man, sweetheart. That's it. That's what he'd said, with his thumb an inch from my mute button, and what he'd saved 2 whole days to deliver to her in person. Simone's mouth opened. Whatever was supposed to come out never reported for duty. The deputy closed the door with that soft, terminal government click, and from the other car, through the glass, Brayden was still going, muffled, urgent, lawyer, misunderstanding, Moses, and I stepped up beside my father and gave Brayden back his own words at exactly the volume you'd use for a toll booth. You were right about one thing, Brayden. Somebody's finally out. The cars pulled away. Earl appeared at Dad's shoulder with 2 cups of the church lady's coffee and surveyed the emptying lot with professional satisfaction. Best service I ever ran. 10 out of 10. Would bury you again. Dad snorted, unpinned the lily boutonniere Earl had insisted on, and laid it on the casket as they wheeled it back toward the van. Give these to somebody who's actually dead, he said. I've got a house to unlock. We unlocked Maple Ridge that same evening, a locksmith of our own choosing, invoice and receipt, because in this family, we keep records now. My father walked straight past everything Brayden's crew had pawed through, went to the mantel, and wound my mother's brass clock first thing, before he'd even taken off the suit. The tick came back into that house. And I think, standing there watching him do it, something started ticking again in him too, something that had gone quiet for a long time without either of us fully noticing. Here's the ledger, because you've earned the numbers by now. Braden was charged with 2 counts of forgery, the power of attorney and the will, plus theft from an elderly person and falsifying a loan application. The state licensing board suspended his mortgage license within the month and revoked it by fall, which in his industry is a death certificate nobody holds a memorial for. BV Capital LLC was dissolved by the receiver. Between the bank's fraud restitution and the clawback from the LLC, my father recovered $141,000 of the $187,000 they took. The HELOC application died frozen. The house was never touched. Patricia moved everything into a living trust with locks on it that Braden couldn't pick with a law degree, which, as it turns out, he also doesn't have. Simone took a plea. Her attorney was smart, and her tears were, for once, in front of the right audience. 3 years probation, restitution on a schedule, and 300 hours of community service, which the judge, who possesses a sense of humor drier than my father's, assigned her at a nursing home. She empties bedpans on Saturdays and reads to residents whose families don't visit. People ask me if I've forgiven my sister. I'll tell you what I told her, through the glass partition at the county probation office, 8 weeks later. She looked smaller there, no mascara left to run, and she asked flatly, "Did you come to gloat?" And I said no, and I meant it, and I slid an envelope across to the officer to pass through, a copy of Mom's letter, the one from the footlocker. At the bottom, under my mother's handwriting, Dad had added a line of his own, in pencil, "Your mother said don't go quiet. That part was for you too. Pay it back, then start over." Simone read it twice. Something moved in her face that I hadn't seen since before Braden, something soft and stunned, like a person remembering, all at once, that she used to be somebody else. I don't know what happens to it from here. That's hers to work out. What I said through that glass was a boundary, not a bridge, and I gave it to her word for word. When the restitution's paid and the counseling's real, you know my address. Until then, you get exactly what you offered me at 6:30 that morning. She nodded. Understood the terms. First honest transaction we'd had in years, and I cried the whole drive home, not for what I'd said, but for how long it had taken either of us to be capable of hearing it. As for the rest of us, Dad's back at the VFW every Thursday, and he and Earl started something that's turned into a small legend in the county. A monthly talk at the Post called Papers While You're Breathing. 2 old men, a folding table, free coffee, teaching people their age how to read a power of attorney, how to spot a signature that's too pretty, how to make sure the will in the drawer is actually theirs. 11 people came the first month. By the third, they were setting up extra chairs, and a woman from 2 towns over stood up and said the talk had caught her nephew mid-signature, right at her own kitchen table, the very same week. I took a staff position at a Columbus hospital. No more 13-week states. And every Sunday I make the 2-hour drive, and Dad burns the bacon on purpose, because he claims I like it that way. Turns out presence isn't a debt you pay off. It's a habit you keep. The brass clock ticks on the mantel. And in his wallet, where the torn envelope with my number used to live, my father now keeps one pressed lily. Best funeral I never had, he says, and every time he says it, I laugh, and then, almost always, a beat later, I cry, because I still think, some quiet nights on that 2-hour drive home, about how close we came to never getting this part back at all. My father taught me that the measure of a man was never the number in his account. It's whether his say still stands while he's breathing, and whether the people who love him would rather guard his signature than inherit it. I took him to Mom's grave the week after the funeral that wasn't a funeral, both of us still a little raw around the edges of everything that had happened. He knelt slowly at her headstone, the same slow, steady way he'd knelt at the footlocker under his own bed, and he told her, out loud, like she could hear every word of it, exactly what had happened while she'd been gone. The porch. The paperwork. The cast. The cinderblock silence of Crest Haven. Room by room, month by month, he gave her the whole accounting, the way he's given an accounting of his life to her every single week since she died, whether she was there to receive it or not. And then he said the thing that undid me completely, standing there behind him in the cold with my hands jammed in my coat pockets. I kept the clock wound, Carol. Whole time. Never missed a Saturday. Just wanted you to know that part held, even when the rest of it didn't. I cried into my sleeve so he wouldn't hear me and worry that I needed comforting instead of the other way around, and when he stood back up, he put his good hand on my shoulder, the same hand that used to check my grip on a wrench in that garage on Route 9, and he said, "She'd have liked watching you fight for me, kiddo. She always did say you were the one with her stubborn streak in you." I told him I hoped that was true. I still hope it every single day. That's my story. One phone call at 6:30, one forged signature, and one old soldier who attended his own funeral standing up. If this reminded you to check your parents' paperwork, or your own, take it as a sign, and do it this week, while everybody's still above ground. If you've lived through family greed, tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. Hit subscribe. Share this with somebody who needs it, before they need it too late.